You are now listening to theGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Writing Black. This is Maisha, and this is a treat today for me because I have on not only one of my favorite writers, but one of my favorite people who I also happen to be related to. That's a full disclosure journalist thing I got to do. This is Keith Boykin, y'all, who a lot of you may know as a popular, political pundit on some of your favorite networks. And he's also a best-selling author who's written, I think, are we on book? We've done book 4 already, Keith, correct? Are we working on like 5 and 6 now? Five books now. Okay, yeah. See, I can't even keep track. This is what happens when you have a very prolific person in your life. And we are not play cousins. We're actually related. And he blessed us by agreeing to come on to Writing Black and talk about his own writing journey. And I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you, Keith. Hi, how are you, honey?
Hey, Maisha, I'm doing really well. Happy to be able to join you on this call for the podcast and just to be able to talk with you about writing.
It's always a pleasure. Listen, in addition to being one of my favorite cousins, you've been very prolific and you have been a groundbreaker, I think, in so many aspects. I mean, you were the first openly gay member of a presidential administration that I know of. You were in Clinton's administration. You also worked on the Dukakis campaign. Your reach in the political sphere is far and wide, and yet you've also, I think, made such an indelible impact in terms of writing on LGBTQIA plus issues. I think well before that was like a part of like popular lexicon, before a lot of other people were considering that. And I think when we talk about bringing your whole self to work or bringing your whole self to your writing, to me, you've always been really exemplary in that respect. So I want to give you kudos on that, but I also want to talk about what that journey has been like for you, because I think you've been at it longer than most of the authors that we talk to, the writers, the poets, the screenplay writers. Most of the people you talk to on this podcast have not been at it as long as you. And I think that that pioneering spirit is something I really want to delve into. So how did that happen for you?
Well, I'm tempted to say it runs in the family,
It does.
Because I think about all the things you've done, not just as a writer, but as an editor, as a model, as a singer, a Grammy-nominated singer at that.
Well, I get it from my mama, so there's that.
Exactly. I think the first time I ever remember seeing your mom actually was a child was when she was on her way to in Houston to host a TV news broadcast that she was anchor of. And so, it's like this, you come from a proud tradition, as do I. And I think it's just something that's always been ingrained in me that you share your story, you use your talents, you help in whatever way you can. And so many of us have these skills and talents that we don't get a chance to utilize because of the lives that we have or the work that we do. And so I'm very fortunate to be able to be a writer, to be able to spend time to write. Because, it takes time to write a book. It takes time out of your life.
Yeah. It really does. And, listen, I think for people who aren't familiar, listen, you have one of the things I actually really love about your writing career. I mean, you've kind of worked in several different mediums of writing. I mean, I remember, for instance, going to a dramatic interpretation of, and this had to be, I'm going to say, gosh, your third or so this maybe was your fourth book, which was For Colored Boys Who Have Considered Suicide,
Right.
And that was when we were both living in New York. Beyond the Down Low was a bestseller. That was a huge thing. And you as somebody who's so politically, astute, you really have leaned into the personal. I think a lot of people in that sphere are really afraid to do that because of, I guess, how to be interpreted, whatever. And I think like you were probably one of the people for me who taught me that the personal is political in a certain respect, right? Like who we are and who we bring to the table and how we make political decisions, who we ask to represent us, et cetera, is incredibly important. And I don't know that we get to do that if we don't express fully who we are. So, I definitely, your early books weren't really political, even though you had this, well, I mean, to me, they weren't overtly political, but like, even though you have, as a professional, really leaned towards politics, your books have really leaned into this like deeply, deeply personal aspect of your life and the lives of so many Black people and brown people in America. What have you wanted people to take from that?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head because it's really important for me, at least, to be able to bring all of different parts of my identity to the table. And as a political person, as a Black person, as a gay man, as an American, so many different identities that I bring into any conversation. And I've never felt like there's any one space where I'm fully represented. So I've always felt like an outsider in every space. And part of that is kind of what I try to sort of bring to my stories. I worked in the White House, but I've been involved in politics my entire life, but I've never been as political as the political people around me. The people who just talk nonstop politics, it's never been me. I like to relax by not talking about politics. And one of the reasons why I left Washington, D.C. years ago is because everybody would always come up to me in bars and restaurants and start talking about politics. I was like, oh my God, get a life, people. And I just kind of feel like I like to sort of be able to be bring all the different dimensions of myself to my writing and to my stories. I find that kind of difficult in some ways too, especially for example with the compartmentalization in social media. So, for example, I think I may have mentioned this to you before. Whenever I'm on Twitter, it seems like people only want me to talk about politics, or race and politics, but usually politics. And if I'm on Instagram, people only want to see pictures or videos. They don't really care as much about politics. They just sort of want to see what I'm doing. And I feel like I can't really figure out a way to sort of integrate all those different things so people can see me in all the different ways I am. So if I post a photograph of myself, just a regular photograph of myself on Twitter, nobody cares. Nobody will even post or respond or anything. But if I post something about Donald Trump, then I get hundreds or thousands of people responding. So it's this difficult thing about like not allowing people to put you into boxes. And I think that's what I try to do in my writing, to sort of show up as who I am, as a political person, as a Black person, as a gay man, as a human being, as an American. There's just so many different interests to who I am, and layers. And none of us come into any conversation just one dimensionally.
No, definitely. Listen, agreed. I struggle with that too. Actually, I've been teasing you for years, so if those of you who actually follow Keith on Instagram will know what I'm talking about. Keith is like my favorite shirtless political pundit. I'm like, I've seen my cousin shirtless like more than probably. I'm not sure if I've seen my own boyfriend as shirtless as I've seen you, but but I love that, and I love again because it's like there's a humanizing aspect to that, and I think we don't always get that in our political discourse. We don't always get that in our I think it's very easy to flatten people, period, in social media discourse, in political discourse, et cetera. And I think that you've constantly demanded to be seen holistically. I remember years ago, people, listen, you have to be of a certain age to remember this, but I remember, Keith, you ran for, you were on, I think it was Showtime, the candidate.
Oh, yeah.
It shocked me at the end when they were asked to vote on me that 23 of them in the focus group raised their hand and said they liked me. It totally confused me.
Where you really were able to kind of bring these, disparate,
Right.
well, I won't even say disparate, just these, varied identities to task in one forum. I want to talk a little bit about craft, though. Did you get any kind of like pushback, from potential publishers, agents, et cetera, when you were like, yeah, I don't really want to like talk about politics all the time. Like I want to, talk about other stuff.
Well, it's interesting because I've gotten pushback from people, but not from publishers about that. I think publishers have put me into sort of a race and sexuality box
Mm.
for years. And so the last book I wrote, Race Against Time,
Yes.
The
Yes.
Politics of a Darkening America, was the first book that didn't deal with sexual orientation really at all. I mean, there was some element of it, but it was 99% of it was not about
Yeah.
that. And a lot of people didn't know exactly how to receive that, it was different for me to do that.
From 1865 to 1964, the racist Democratic Party of the 19th century slowly evolved into the Party of Civil Rights, while Lincoln's Republican Party very gradually began to transition into the party against those rights.
But one of the dangers I was afraid of from the beginning when I started writing was that I would be pigeonholed as just sort of a black gay writer, just only writing about black LGBTQIA issues. And that's something I was interested in, but it wasn't the only thing I was interested in because I'd also worked in politics. I've been a lawyer, I've been a teacher, a professor, and I have a lot of different backgrounds and interests. But sometimes it's hard for that to show up in the publishing world. I also remember an instance when my third book was published, Beyond the Download. It was a picture of me, speaking of what you were saying, there's a picture of me on the cover of the book in a black t-shirt. And I liked the picture. I thought it was kind of a cool picture. But one of my colleagues called me up after he received a copy of the book and said, I have a question. Are you selling books or beefcake here?
Why can't I
And
be
I was
both?
thinking, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. It's like, I don't care why people buy the book as long as they buy the book, So,
Well,
but hopefully they'll read it once they get
I'm
it.
happy to say my copy is signed. My copy is signed.
Okay.
I'm also in the liner notes of Race Against Time, so I feel special. Y'all, we're going to take a break, but stay tuned for more Writing Black.
Introducing Dear Culture with Panama Jackson on the theGrio Black Podcast Network. Bring your friends for the shenanigans and stay for the edutainment as Panama debates culture wars, Janet Jackson versus Michael, Black fashions, Black mendations, and everything black. Listen today on the theGrio mobile app for all the Black culture conversations you don't want to miss. Also available wherever great podcasts are heard.
Welcome back to Writing Black, y'all. And clearly took us on, you really took us through a civics lesson and a journey in terms of how we got here, why we're here, who wants us here, and how it serves them, and what we personally should be doing to get ourselves out of here, right? I do hope people engage with that book because I think it's really, you made it very digestible, and you made it, these are some fundamental truths that we're living with right now. And I think like even since you've published it, we've seen even more of what you were already discussing unfold. But, I think to myself with that, like, do you think people have a hard time in terms of like, who was the messenger of that? Like, who's the right person to deliver that information? I feel like there's so many people, and we're all kind of like screaming into the void saying, hey, Is there a right person to deliver that information? Is there a right person? I don't know anybody who's more politically astute than you. Like, personally, I don't know that person. But what is it about that message that people are having such a hard time processing, I guess?
Well, there's that old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I feel like there's lots of teachers out there. It's just a question of whether America, the student, is willing to listen. And the reality is that most of us who are in the African American community have been teachers on this for a long time. We've been warning about what's happening in our country for years. We've been warning about the dangers of Trump. We've been warning about the backlash against Barack Obama. We've been warning about the rise in racism and white supremacy and anti-blackness. But a lot of those warnings were dismissed. I remember literally being on CNN a few years ago when Donald Trump was president and making some statement about, after Trump had retweeted something about some people who were endorsing a civil war or whatever. And I mentioned this, I was saying that the President of the United States should not be essentially endorsing the idea of civil war. And the people who were on the panel just kind of dismissed me like I was crazy for even saying this. And Black people, I think we've always been the canary in the coal
Mm-hmm.
mine. We've always been the ones to sort of warn America about the dangers. And I think Black people can see very clearly where our country is headed right now. And I think a lot of people aren't really stepping up to the plate. So I don't necessarily know that I have to be the messenger, or that it could ever be a sole messenger. I think there are lots of messengers out there who can communicate that message. And so there's a lot of people who are writing books now and talking about these things. And some of my favorite books are books that I've quoted in my most recent book, Ibram X. Kendi's book, Stamped from the
Yeah.
Beginning, or How to Be an
Mm-hmm.
Anti-Racist, books like The New Jim Crow, or The 1619
Mm-hmm.
Project, books that are really delving into not only who we are as a nation, but how we got here as a country. And I think the knowledge has always been there, but we haven't always been willing to acknowledge it and admit it. Not we, you and I, but we meaning America as a larger
Listen,
society.
maybe me too sometimes. I think it's really hard. It's a hard reality to sit with. I think that, I mean, listen, I always call this a writing podcast and not a political podcast, but the personal is political. And I think of anybody that I know, you have helped me reconcile that, right? Like that it is this who we are and how we exist in the world is political. And there are people who will cease to deny that. And some people have the luxury of denying that, but I can't, like you can't, So, yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think, yeah, you're right. There is no perfect messenger for that. Y'all, we're going to take a break, but stay tuned for more Writing Black.
Introducing Dear Culture with Panama Jackson on the Creole Black Podcast Network. Bring your friends for the shenanigans and stay for the edutainment as Panama debates culture wars, Janet Jackson versus Michael, Black Questions, Black Mendations, and everything Black. Listen today on the Creole mobile app for all the Black culture conversations you don't want to miss. Also available wherever great podcasts are heard.
Welcome back to Writing Black, y'all. I want to hear about your upcoming books. I do. I know you guys, you have stuff
Well,
coming out.
it's funny you say that, because I was just about to segue into that when you mentioned
Come
the
through.
personal is
Come through.
political.
Yes.
Because I think I'm working on four different book projects
Four?
right
You
now.
told me too.
Yeah, but
You're so busy.
okay. I'm using the word working a little
Yes,
loosely here
okay.
when I say that. Okay. I have developed four different book
Mm-hmm.
proposals, and they're in different stages of development. Put it that
Okay.
way. But three of those four are all very, very personal. One is it's called, I think it's tentatively called, "Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race?" Which is sort of a response to all the questions and answers, and provides answers to all the debates that have been going on in our
Mm-hmm.
country. Not just affirmative action, but critical race theory and teaching Black history and Juneteenth. Everything that's going on, people are talking about, is sort of a response that provides information to respond to
Mm-hmm.
that. That's the least personal of those four books, and that one will probably come out
Okay.
next year. But in the meantime, I just finished a book that will come out this year, which is my first ebook actually, and I'm publishing this with Scrib, and this one's called "Quitting: Why I Left My Job to Live My Life with
Oh,
Freedom."
well, that's a comment.
That's a very personal
Listen,
story about being.
that's
I
a
know,
current
right?
event.
Exactly.
Ask
It's a very
Beyonce. That is a
common
current
story.
event.
It's a very exactly. Well, I'm not telling everybody to quit their job like Big Frida and
Funny enough, I don't actually
Beyonce,
think
but
they
I'm
were
saying,
they were telling people to quit their jobs either. But that's another story. That's another
yeah.
story. Just saying.
But I am telling people to quit this mentality of identifying ourselves
Yeah.
by our work,
Yeah.
to start to live our lives, and to redefine the whole concept of how we work and where we work and why we work in the first place. I mentioned in the book a story about visiting Spain when I was in college, and watching the siesta hour, in the afternoon every day in Granada, Spain, when I was a foreign exchange student, and thinking, why do they take 2 hours out of the day every day just to do nothing? It doesn't make any sense to me. My American capitalist thinking mentality. I'm like, this is so inefficient. And I remember asking a bartender in a local bar once about this in Granada. And he said to me, well, Americans, you work to live. Excuse me, you live to work. Sorry. And in Spain, we work to live. So, it occurred to me then, oh yeah, we do focus our lives around work in America, and that shouldn't necessarily be the way things are. So anyway, that is a very personal book. And then the other two books that are in earlier stages of development, one I think you may know about, which is, well, you know about both stories, but one is about the search for my biological father, which I just sort of discovered 5 years ago, I guess 6 years ago. And what that's about, and what that says about our history as a country, about Black history, about how Black people are still, it's a very political conversation, even though it's a very personal conversation, because to me, it's a reflection of how so much of our history has been stolen from us. Like most people can't trace their history in the African American community, can't trace the history back past the 20th century. And I couldn't trace my history past a few decades before I was born, but because I was able to do some research, I was able to go back even farther. So then the last project, I guess is the fourth project, is a book about a person I met in Cuba 6 years ago. Started dating, and we had this international relationship. And went to Cuba, went to Havana every month, and wrote about it a lot on Facebook, and then I helped him to move to Chile, and he was in living in Chile for several years. And then just a few months ago, he crossed the border into the United States and in Mexico and applied for asylum. And I'm in Los Angeles right now, but I was in New York last week, and just last week in New York, I saw him for the first time in the United States. So it's sort of telling that whole story of how this person who I met 6 years ago in Cuba went on this whole worldwide journey and ended up here in the United States. And even though it's a personal story, it's also a story about America and immigration and why people want to come here and all the other things they're going.
Stay tuned for more Writing Black.
The Creole Black Podcast Network is here, and it's everything you've been waiting for. News, talk, entertainment, sports, and today's issues, all from the Black perspective. Ready for real talk and Black culture amplified? Be inspired. Listen to new and established voices now on the Creole Black Podcast Network. Listen today on the Creole mobile app and tune in everywhere great podcasts are heard.
Welcome back to Writing Black, y'all. I'm just gonna be honest, like for me, obviously we were born here, and whatever that means to be Black in America, and we know that that's incredibly loaded, and that is very dependent on class and, socioeconomic mobility, et cetera. In terms of your experience here, it does astound me sometimes. I'm like, oh, you still want to come here? And I think that's a really important conversation to have, especially given what we saw, or I would even say saw magnified in the last administration here in America, in terms of how it so deeply magnified the immigration issue and how immigrants and those seeking asylum are treated, how their children are treated, and what one can hope to look for here in this supposed, American dream.
Well, but part of that, my issue is that we forget sometimes just how privileged we are, even though things are incredibly outrageous right now in our country. We forget just how privileged we are in so many respects. I mean, I remember when I met this guy in Cuba, I had no idea what his socioeconomic status was. It was, I think, only in my second or third trip to Havana when I finally went to his house and met his mom and his family, and I discovered he was dirt poor. I mean, dirt poor meaning like there was no bathroom door, there was no bathroom toilet seat, there was no running water. The roof was leaking. I couldn't believe it. The average income for Cubans at that time was something. This was only a few years ago. Something like $25 to $30 a month. So So here I come in this American staying in these fancy hotels and spending hundreds of dollars on
Right.
meals and stuff like that. And it's a whole different world of privilege that we come from. So yes, I can see why somebody would want to leave that world and come here, even despite all the challenges that we have in this country. So it was a learning experience for me
I mean,
as
I think
well.
it's a learning experience we should all have because I think that that's. I mean, you're right. You know I'm incredibly privileged. Even while I'm not amongst the most privileged in this country, I do acknowledge that. But I do think that that contrast that you're discussing, no, I don't always think about that. I don't think most people think about that. Does that mean I'm sitting around being totally grateful for the way that like America treats its marginalized people? No,
No,
absolutely not.
right.
You're also an academic. You are an educator, also at this point. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think, like, yes, there is writing, there's craft of writing, there's craft of communicating the story, and then there's the craft of sharing the story and helping other people to share theirs. So, what is that experience like for you? Like, what are you teaching, and how are you teaching it?
Well, I'm glad you said that. But, I'm glad you used those two terms, academic and educator, because I don't know that I fit in as an academic. I think I do fit in as an educator. I don't really sort of use sort of the academic lingo and jargon that so many other academics use. Um, I I find that to be
Okay.
off-putting in some ways, and I understand the utility of it for some people, but for me, I like my writing to be accessible. So instead of writing in with words that I think are commonly used in the academy, I'm more interested in using words that will resonate with the ordinary reader. Hopefully, the reader will be intelligent still, but not necessarily needing to be familiar with all the latest
Mm-hmm.
jingle and jargon,
Hmm.
lingo and jargon. I'm sorry. And So yeah, that's always been a challenge for me, sort of finding my way. This is why I say it all the time. I never fit in wherever I am. People always assume I fit in because I have all these experiences. Oh, I went to the Ivy League schools. I went to Harvard. I worked at CNN. I worked in the White House. Oh, I never fit in any of those places. I always felt like I was an outsider in all of those places. And even in academia, I feel like I'm an outsider because I don't really come from the academic background. So the most recent course I've taught is a course on race and media. This is probably a
Hmm.
perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. So I enjoyed the course. It started. It's a course at City College in New York. It started in February and ended in May, and it required me to go back and forth between here and Los Angeles to New York every other week because it was a hybrid course, half in person, half virtual. Which at first when I signed up for, I was like, "Oh yeah, this is going to be great. I'll get to go back to New York whenever I want." Oh, that was the dumbest thing I ever did. It wore me out. It just
Hmm.
took so much energy going back and forth. I didn't have the desire to even teach once I got there. It's just the stress of going back and 5 and 6 hours in the plane, all that stuff every other week. It wears you out. So I would never ever do that again. But the course itself was an interesting course. I wanted to talk about race and media and racial bias and all that. And we spent the first half of the course doing that. And there were so many examples of things to talk about: politics and media, sports, and just so many examples of bias that we were seeing and analyzing. And of course, pop culture and TV and film as well. But finally, it got to the point for me where I was like, I'm tired of teaching this course. Probably shouldn't say that, but I was tired of teaching the course halfway through. Um, and I wanted to make the course more interesting for me and for the students in a way that was reflective of, I think, where my interests are right now. So we changed the second half of the course. We changed the syllabus. So I asked the students to work on creating a screenplay. Um, so we spent the second half of the class basically as a joint project writing a 30-minute comedy screenplay for it had to be a racially inclusive comedy screenplay. And they came up with this
I was like,
amazing
who are
idea,
you,
which
Norman
I don't
Lear?
know how they
Okay.
developed this. I know. But I mean, they came up with a great idea. Instead of just critiquing the media all the time, let's create something. That was the concept behind it. And I showed them how to do a screenplay because
Hmm.
that's what I'm working on now. I'm working on TV and film projects out here in LA, and gave them whole instructions on how to do it step by step. And they came up with this amazing idea. It was like a 1970s comedy show, a sitcom involving a multiracial LGBTQI group of friends who were living in the same house in New York City. And I don't know how they came up with that idea and why they chose to set in the 1970s. And I was thinking, this is unusual. These are young kids, like 20-year-olds, and this is what they came up with. But it was a really fascinating project to watch them develop it.
Stay tuned for more Writing Black.
Witty, honest, entertaining. Introducing Dear Culture with Panama Jackson on the GRIO Black Podcast Network. Listen today on the GRIO mobile app for all the Black culture debates you don't want to miss. Also available wherever great podcasts are heard.
Welcome back to Writing Black, y'all.
And I really liked what they came up
I
with.
loved how you just suddenly slipped in that you're working on a screenplay, that you're screenwriting now. I'm like, dude, we're in a writing podcast. How do you just like slip that in? Like, oh yeah, and then,
Well, that's the reason why. That's one of the reasons why I moved to LA. I'm working on like 4 different. Speaking of, I always got a lot of things going on. Working on 4 different TV and film projects. One is a 1-hour drama scripted series I'm working on with my producing partner here, Jarrett Hill, which involves, I won't say too much, but it's tentatively titled Ambition, and it involves somebody who runs for office. I'll just say that in New York. The second is a comedy series, and this is about polyamorous relationships, put it that way. The third is a documentary film about how shall I say it? A sports legend. This is one that we're already in development. We're shooting that one already. Sports legend. And the fourth is a docu series, a limited docu series. I'm trying to describe these without telling too much, so not because I haven't told anybody about what they are. So that's why there's a little ambiguity in my voice. But the fourth is it's about various candidates running for office. Let's put it that
listen,
way.
and this is exactly why I wanted you.
Oh,
there's
and I have
more?
another
You got
idea.
more?
I just
Okay,
came
come
up
on,
with
give it.
recently. Well, this is a new one. I probably shouldn't say this because this one I haven't developed at all. But I just came up with this idea like 2 weeks ago, and I probably should tell you offline. But I think it's a comedy that I'm really really excited about, and I kind of like wanted to stop everything else and work on this one. But I know I have so much else to do. But yeah, it's very relevant to what's going on in our country. But yeah.
Okay, you
I'll
tell
you
me, and
about
if
it
you need a
offline,
co-writer, you let me know.
yeah. Okay.
But this is exactly why I wanted you on the podcast, because I think that a lot of times people, like writers especially, we think there's only one way to do something. There's only one medium. There's only one vehicle. And you, more than anybody I know, that ability to kind of like pivot and evolve and explore and, whether it's different genres or topics or what have you, like, I just think like that's what it's about, right? Like you're a writer and we write. That's what we do. Stay tuned for more Writing Black.
The GRIO Black Podcast Network is here, and it's everything you've been waiting for. News, talk, entertainment, sports, and today's issues, all from the Black perspective. Ready for real talk and Black culture amplified? Be inspired. Listen to new and established voices now on the GRIO Black Podcast Network. Listen today on the GRIO mobile app and tune in everywhere great podcasts are heard.
Welcome back to Writing Black, y'all. I just really appreciate this conversation. Now, I have to ask you, since you have been educating people, is there recommended reading that you would give to people who are aspiring to write or to explore different genres, or even just to kind of open their minds to like what they could be writing about? Like, what books do you gravitate towards when you think about what inspired you to write?
That's a good question. I feel like it's a couple of questions
Probably.
in there in one. And I can't give any sort of how-to books per se on how to write, but there are a lot of books that have influenced me as a writer. I don't even know where to begin, but one of the most influential was the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley, or as told to Alex Haley. And I remember reading that long time ago, and think I was in college before high school, and being influenced not just by the storytelling, but by the person whose story was being told. Um, and so I think I always was sort of drawn to nonfiction books, for a long time. Um, I'm only recently in my life starting to embrace fiction more, and I wish I had done that when I was younger, because I'd probably be reading more fiction now than I am. But my two favorite novels, I'd say, one is Alice Walker's The Color Purple, which strangely enough I read in college and I didn't like. I read it in college and I was like, oh, I can't stand this. I mean, partly because I didn't like the language in which it was told, and also because I wasn't a fiction
Meanwhile,
reader
I
at that
chose my
point.
college because Alice Walker went there, man.
I didn't like it when I first read it. And then I read it many years later as an adult. And it just completely resonated with me in a way that it did not when I was in college. And I was like, wow, how did I not appreciate this? And because you can only, like I said before, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And the second book is a more recent book called The Prophets, which I think I may have talked about. Yeah, exactly. The Prophet. I love that book.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Robert
may have
Johns
it
Jr., he
right
writes.
here.
Oh, you have it right there. Exactly.
We've spoken to Robert for the podcast. Robert's one of my favorite writers.
That
It's
is
an
an
amazing book.
amazing.
Yes.
That's an amazing book. And part of the reason why I resonated with it too, I have to admit, in my own bias, is that years ago in the 90s, I tried to write a novel, my first novel, and it took place in Columbus, Georgia, in antebellum Columbus, Georgia, and it was about two black men who were enslaved. And I never finished it. I don't think because I said I was never a fiction reader. I don't think I had the skill set at that time to be able to develop in the way I would want to. And reading The Prophets made me appreciate that someone had taken an idea that was only just a small concept in my head, even though I developed it a lot, but and gone an entirely different direction, and done justice to it in a way that I never could have. So I'm so glad that book is in existence. It's amazing piece of literature.
Absolutely.
But then, there's a lot of nonfiction books I read all the time. And I read everything from spirituality books to political books to books about race. So I'm all over the map on the nonfiction and biographies as well. So I'm all over the map on nonfiction books. I find that if I read a biography, I have to do audiobooks. Like I did Barack Obama's biography. And
I'm glad. That's a thick book. That's
yeah.
Listen, I hope you listen to it on the plane on those, cross country flights,
because it's such a long. And he even makes fun of himself in the book. He talks about how Michelle and his daughters would always tell him that he speaks so slowly that they have to turn up the speed when they listen to him on the audiobook.
And that's only part one, so
slow.
that's part
that's a good idea.
We're gonna get more. Keith, listen, obviously personally I love you, but professionally I'm inspired by you, and I'm so glad that you are in my ether, let alone my family. So thank you so much for joining us on Writing Black, especially as this is a new podcast for the Griot, and it's such a blessing to have you here, and to, you're always so fun and so candid. So I'm sure this won't be the last time, and I know I will be getting these 2 new books. So 4 new books. So, you will keep me posted, and we will keep our audience posted. But thank you so much for being here. Love you, love you, love you. I see I'm not going to say it to all my writers on this. Love you, love you, love you. But I do.
I love you too, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
All right, we're going to take a pause, but stay tuned for more Writing Black.
Witty, honest, entertaining. Introducing Dear Culture with Panama Jackson on the Griot Black Podcast Network. Listen today on the Griot mobile app for all the Black culture debates you don't want to miss. Also available wherever great podcasts are heard.
All right, let's dig back into it. Welcome back to Writing Black. So obviously it was such a treat to have my cousin Keith on the show, and now it's time for my favorites, where I recommend to you books that are related to the content that we have discussed. Keith, aside from being my cousin, he's obviously been a political pundit for a very long time. And his new book, which we did discuss on the podcast, is finally coming to people as a digital release, Quitting. And I can't think of a better book for this moment than Quitting. Whether we're talking about, you're not going to let them break your soul no more, or, just the great resignation. This is a phenomenal time to kind of reevaluate our lives and what we really want out of life. I think if the last few years has taught us anything, it's that life is incredibly precious. It's been a reminder that life is incredibly precious, and that we all need to make our time here as meaningful and fulfilling as possible. So I highly recommend Quitting to you by my cousin and friend, Keith Boykin. But I also recommend this book. You know this face, y'all. Tabitha Brown, Feeding the Soul, Finding Our Way to Joy, Love, and Freedom. So you see there's a theme here. Let's get free. Let's get free in the new year. Holidays are coming. Let's let it all go. Dance it off to Renaissance, and then come hard in the new year. New year, new you, new stuff, new time, maybe a new job. I don't know. But feed your soul. And we'll see you next time on Writing Black. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Writing Black. As always, you can find us on the theGrio app or wherever you find your podcasts.
You're watching the Blackest Questions podcast with Christina Greer. In this podcast, we ask our guests 5 of the blackest questions so we can learn a little bit more about them and have some fun while we're doing it.
Okay, so this is a trick question.
We're also going to learn a lot about Black history, past and present.
Beautiful. I learned a wonderful fact today. Great.
So here's how it works. We have 5 rounds of questions about us, Black history, the whole diaspora, current events, you name it. With each round, the questions get a little tougher.
Oh, you got me. Let me see.
I have no idea.
I knew you were going to go there, Dr. Greer.
Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast and share it with everyone you know.
The Creole Black Podcast Network is here, and it's everything you've been waiting for. News, talk, entertainment, sports, and today's issues, all from the Black perspective. Ready for real talk and Black culture amplified? Be inspired. Listen to new and established voices now on the Creole Black Podcast Network. Listen today on the Creole mobile app and tune in everywhere great podcasts are heard.